There are all sorts of issues and circumstances there, but we've all been through there. We've all had that same spotlight shone on our lives.
Compared to his nationally famous siblings, King Charles III, Princess Anne and Prince Andrew, Prince Edward, the youngest son of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, has led a relatively low-profile life. As a member of arguably one of the most famous families in the world, Edward has often kept his life away from press attention, as he carved his niche for navigating a career that demanded discretion and adaptability with respect to his royal duties. But what is the reason you haven't heard so much about Prince Edward? Join us as we take a look at Prince Edward's life. Prince Edward was Queen Elizabeth's youngest of 4 children, born on March 10, 1964. When it comes to comparing him with all the Queen's children, Prince Edward had a somewhat quiet childhood compared to the others. By the time he was born, his mother had already been queen for more than a decade, and the monarchy had settled into an altogether more stable rhythm. Edward's early life was far different from that of King Charles III and Princess Anne, who grew up in a far more intense period of public scrutiny during their mother's ascension to the throne. He was born when Charles and Anne were already teenagers, and Andrew, born in 1960, was only 4 years his senior. While by no means alienated from them, the dynamic he had with his siblings couldn't help but be far less close than it was between Charles and Anne, who, by the time he came of age, had already started their public careers. Despite this, he reportedly was close to all his siblings, especially Andrew, with whom he shared more similarities during their childhood years. Due to the situation at the time, rumors began to fly that Prince Edward was actually the Queen's favorite. The monarchy never came out with a statement to that effect, but this sort of speculation wasn't entirely unusual, as Edward had been treated quite differently from his siblings. Some accounts further report that his quieter nature and more introverted character perhaps won the Queen's heart, who might have been happy with the drama-free life that Edward had relatively lived. Unlike his older siblings, who time and again managed to get themselves embroiled in controversies in public and strained personal relationships, Edward seemed to approach life with quite a bit of wariness. This explains the unique bond between Edward and the Queen, who reportedly found in him a level of loyalty and restraint that sets him apart from his brothers. For instance, Edward never indulged in public fights typical of his siblings like Charles, with his stormy marriage to Princess Diana, and Andrew with scandals that tarnished his reputation later. While Edward's siblings took various stints in the military as focus areas, Edward chose not to and only briefly trained with the Royal Marines. Instead, he pursued careers in the arts and television. In 1987, after leaving the Royal Marines, Edward set up his own television production company called Ardent Productions. Although the career in television brought its moments of controversy, most notably over how his royal status gave him advantages, it was also a career that distanced him from the more traditional royal roles his siblings had taken. Edward's private lifestyle also extends to his children. Whereas the children of Prince William and others are in the media spotlight at almost any given moment, Edward's are not a conscious decision by their parents to let them have as normal an upbringing as possible. The children are also not entitled to the titles of prince or princess, an indication that Edward and Sophie did not want their children to go through some of the pressures associated with royal life. Since the death of Prince Philip, Edward has taken on more public roles in support of Queen Elizabeth and now King Charles III. But even in those duties, Edward is happy to remain very much in the background, focusing his efforts on smaller, very specific charitable causes rather than the high-profile engagements of his siblings. At the time of his birth in 1964, Edward was third in line to the throne after his older brothers Charles and Andrew. With the births of Charles's sons William and Harry, and William's 3 children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, Edward had slowly inched his way down the line of succession. This puts him in 13th place in line to the throne in 2024. This placed him further down the line of succession and gave him more freedom to follow his own interests and create a niche that mixed his royal duties with personal fulfillment. The focus on his family, combined with his devotion to his charity work, has enabled Edward to hold a respected, yet generally low-profile place within the family. Unlike his brothers, Charles and Andrew, who often were at the eye of a public tempest, sometimes concerning failed marriages or arguments with the press, Edward has kept more of a middle-ground public persona. In the early 2000s, leaving the world of television production for purely royal duties probably confirmed this very cautious approach. Edward's marriage to Sophie Rhys-Jones has also tended to stabilize his public persona. Whereas in the early days of their marriage, Sophie herself was being hounded by the media, she too has largely lived a private life attending to the performance of her shared duties and charity work. Despite the rumors that he was Queen Elizabeth's favorite, he has kept such a level of discretion that has kept him out of controversies and public conflicts that have hit other members of the royal family. Being so far down the line of succession from the immediate pressures of the throne has allowed him the space, unlike his older brothers, to work out a life that marries royal responsibility with personal fulfillment. These days, he is one of the most stable and least contentious members of the British monarchy, with continuous support for his brother King Charles III. Looking back at his early life, Edward was always headed for greatness with the opportunities that came his way. Prince Edward was first admitted to Heatherdown Preparatory School in Berkshire, where he had his initial education. Later, Edward would attend Gordonstoun, a Scottish boarding school attended earlier by his father, Prince Philip. Gordonstoun was notorious for having rigorous programs, physically and intellectually. The school was known to mold defiant personalities through its very strenuous outdoor activities and communitarian curriculum. Like his father and older brother, King Charles III, Edward passed through this exacting environment, which also made him self-reliant and independent. After school at Gordonstoun, Edward went on to Jesus College, Cambridge, following in the footsteps of his family into higher education. He attended Jesus College, Cambridge, studying history and graduating with a Bachelor of Arts in 1986, thus setting him apart as one of the few royals who have graduated from Cambridge. His time at Cambridge would further expose him to the arts and culture, cultivating this emerging passion for theater and film. However, notwithstanding his love of the creative arts, Edward's first choice of career path was rather the military service. Prince Edward joined the Royal Marines, a very well-recognized branch of the British military, in 1986 upon graduating from Cambridge. He had taken this path because there was a good tradition of military service in the royal family. It was a royal rite of passage. Prince Philip and King Charles had also served in the Royal Navy, but Edward's time with the Royal Marines proved very short-lived. Having undergone basic training, Edward felt that military life was not in consonance with his personality and aspirations. Only 4 months into the strenuous training program, Edward decided to leave the Royal Marines. In 1987, Edward left the Royal Marines. This was quite a significant moment in his life. Edward did not go the conventional path that his immediate and extended family members had laid out for him. Edward chose to take on another passion in the arts, mainly theater and television. It was during his time at Cambridge that he expressed his interest in performing arts through various theatrical performances. Now free from the discipline imposed by military life, what was left for Edward was how he was going to forge his own path in life. In the late 1980s, Edward had a short tenure as a production assistant at Andrew Lloyd Webber's Really Useful Theatre Company. He learned much about the way things worked backstage, and his ambition for a career in media production was satisfied. In 1993, Edward started his own production company, Ardent Productions. The company was basically an organization of television programs on documentaries, drama series, and other forms of programs, mainly materials that focused on the British royal family and other similar historical subjects. In its early years, Ardent Productions had secured some publicity due to its royal association, but Edward was keen for it to be taken seriously as a productive element of the television industry. Over the years, Ardent has produced everything from documentaries such as Edward on Edward, in which he explored the life of his great-uncle, King Edward VIII, who caused a constitutional crisis by renouncing the throne to Mary Wallace Simpson. That documentary finally presented Edward with the opportunity to plunge into historical storytelling. However, Ardent Productions never quite achieved commercial success. The output of this company was frequently panned due to a lack of professionalism, with various media commentaries noting that Edward's royal status opened doors for him into projects that possibly might not have been available to every other fledgling producer. Edward did what he could to nurture his passion for media, balancing work at Ardent with his royal duties. The year 2000 saw another turning point in the life of Prince Edward, when his father, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, withdrew from active public life. Thus, Edward was summoned to take a larger share of royal responsibilities. In light of such demands emanating from his royal role, Edward decided to step away from his career in television production. Ardent Productions was wound down, and Edward took on full-time royal duties. This freed him to better support his mother, Queen Elizabeth, as well as an expanding portfolio of patronages and charitable activities. With Prince Philip's retirement, Edward's position in the royal family had come more to the fore, and he took particular interest in the Duke of Edinburgh's award, the youth scheme set up by his father. The deeper commitment that Edward showed to this cause underlined his sense of duty and the growing importance he held within the royal framework. That he could adjust to such new roles showed flexibility and dedication to the legacy of his family. Besides these critical moments, Edward's life also included choosing his own royal titles. When Edward married Sophie Rhys-Jones in 1999, he became the Earl of Wessex, a surprise to many following happenings of the royal family, since traditionally, sons of the monarch held the rank of a duke. His decision to become the Earl of Wessex was said to be influenced by a love for the arts, and in particular his favorite movie, Shakespeare in Love. That movie had one of the characters, a nobleman carrying the title of Earl of Wessex, and Edward seemed to enjoy the historical and almost romantic association with the name. The Queen verified Edward's desire, and he was officially made Earl of Wessex. It has also been told that Edward shall, in due course, take the title Duke of Edinburgh upon his father's death. Ever since, Edward has been more and more involved in the activities of the royal family. Edward's title is a thoughtful consideration in building up his royal identity. Instead of adhering to the formal convention of royalty, he chose an option deeply steeped in his personal taste and regard for history and culture. His relationship with the arts sows into this subtly, underlining his lifelong love for the creative world as he moved away from a life in television production. The Earl of Wessex, Prince Edward, has also had a rather low-key marital life compared to his other older siblings. The marriage of Prince Edward to Sophie Rhys-Jones was not only subdued, but carried with it a sense of modernity and simplicity that hasn't been as common in the typical grand romance royal weddings. This quieter approach to personal life has contributed to Edward's reputation as one of the more grounded, private members of the British royal family. Along with Sophie, he has built a stable family life, raising 2 children, Lady Louise Windsor and James, Viscount Severn, who also have been kept largely out of the public eye in keeping with their parents' approach to life. The wedding between Prince Edward and Sophie Rhys-Jones was conducted on June 19, 1999, at St. George's Chapel within Windsor Castle, a venue typically used for royal marriages, but one which was decidedly not as conspicuous as the high-profile venues that his siblings had chosen. Edward and Sophie's marriage was far from the headline wedding of Prince Charles to Diana, and from the flashy wedding of Prince Andrew to Sarah Ferguson. Whereas both of those weddings were broadcast worldwide with considerable fanfare, Edward and Sophie's ceremony was significantly smaller in scale. This subdued wedding profile catered to the need of Edward and Sophie for privacy and a wish for normalcy. They consciously opted for a private family ceremony as opposed to a big public ceremony. The couple also barred their guests from wearing ceremonial uniforms, which further gave the occasion its simple outlook. At the time, this approach was praised for its contrast to the often smothering pomp and circumstance that usually accompanies royal occasions. Sophie also was not of an aristocratic class, and before their marriage was a public relations executive, furthering the couple's image as a more modern and down-to-earth royal couple. The wedding was, to a great degree, low-key, and the union of Edward and Sophie has stood the test of time as one of the most solid and steadfast couples in the royal family. Through the years, they have truly been a team that one could depend on their work in many charitable causes and their small family life. Prince Edward and Sophie have two children, Lady Louise Windsor, born on November 8, 2003, and James Viscount Severn, on December 17, 2007. The children also have been raised with a degree of privacy unusual within the royal family. Also, in an unusual fashion, Louise and James are addressed by the courtesy titles Lady and Viscount, respectively, rather than Princess and Prince. This is a decision taken by Edward and Sophie to lighten the expectations placed on them, as the royal title often carries an onerous expectation, one that Edward and Sophie would not wish to see their children face. Their eldest child, Lady Louise Windsor, has kept out of the media eye since her childhood by attending school and generally leading a near-to-normal existence for a royal family member. As Louise has grown older, she sometimes joins her parents at public events, and she drew attention to the dignity with which she conducted herself during the period of mourning following Queen Elizabeth II's death in 2022. Lady Louise had grown close to her grandmother, Queen Elizabeth. More often, she joins her family in the outdoors, especially horse riding and carriage driving. She loves this and shared it with the late Duke of Edinburgh. James Viscount Severn is the younger of the two children and, just like his sister, has led a life mostly out of the limelight. Being the youngest grandchild of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, James received a more low-key upbringing which the Duke and the Duchess had managed to keep somewhat under wraps. He holds the title of Viscount Severn, but that does not weigh him down much in terms of public engagements. Thus, he should have been able to have a more quiet childhood. Lady Louise and Viscount Severn are considerably further down the line of succession because their parents have kept them away from such a more public lifestyle. In 2024, Lady Louise was 16th in line to the British throne, with James 15th. Neither of the children has been addressed as a prince or princess, reflecting their parents' desire for them to have a less public life, despite their place in the line of succession. Prince Edward and his wife Sophie have been praised for their very modern approach to raising their children, focusing on a normal upbringing with the development of the children as individuals being most important rather than adhering to traditional expectations of the royal family. This means that Lady Louise and James can grow up without too much intrusion from the media, and they are private in comparison to many other grandchildren of the Queen. Both remain very much behind the scenes and have still managed to fulfill their commitments. As the Earl and Countess of Wessex, they attend a number of events on behalf of the monarchy and carry out a heavy amount of charity work. Their involvement with organizations such as the Duke of Edinburgh's Award and the support of people with disabilities have solidified them as an industrious and dependable couple for the monarchy. If anything, the marriage of Prince Edward to Sophie and the resulting family life have, in many respects, revealed a kind of royalty, being the type that places stability in family and personal fulfillment above public views and media scrutiny, which arguably filled the lives of Edward's older siblings. Through the choices made, Edward and his wife Sophie have been able to maintain a royal existence at their own pace, one which marries both tradition and modernity. So now you know all about Prince Edward. Do check out other videos in the channel for details about other popular figures, and we will see you in the next one.